I got the invitation to go on this Armed Lutheran radio show, though. You know this guy? Have you seen this? There's two things that I would like to say that make me feel safe. Number one, the fact that there is a radio show called the Armed Lutheran Podcast somewhere in the world. That makes me feel safe.
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Armed Lutheran Radio, a show about guns, hunting, competitive shooting, the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode number 467. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for making Armed Lutheran Radio a part of your week again this week. Thank you to all of our supporters, the members of the Reformation Gun Club, who make this show possible. I really do appreciate your support. If you would like to become a member, if you would like to help support the show and keep it going, we would appreciate your help. Every penny, every dollar is appreciated. Visit armedlutheran.us/gun club. That will take you to a page that kind of explains all the benefits, the access to hundreds of hours of exclusive content, the availability of discounts at our store, the invitations to our monthly online hangouts, all that good stuff. And then you click a button, it will take you to Give, Send, Go, which is a Christian crowdfunding website. And then you donate whatever the Spirit moves you to donate. And every penny, as I said, is appreciated. Just make one donation a year for whatever amount, and then come hang out with us and meet the other members. Get to know all the good people. Hang out with Pastor Bennett and a bunch of the regulars. If you've seen the videos from our online hangout episodes, they're always a lot of fun. So check that out, reformationgunclub.com, armedlutheran.us/gun club, or visit or check out the links in the show notes for this or any of our previous episodes. Okay, what are we doing today? Well, I do need to get to some Q&A, respond to some comments that I've received. I'm not going to do that today because I haven't compiled all that stuff yet. I do need to sit down and take care of that, kind of get a handle on that. So that will be coming in the near future. What I thought I would do, though, today, as I've said in a previous episode where I talked about AI, and this has been it's been in the news lately. Apparently, there is a top-rated country music song that is entirely AI. The artist doesn't even exist. It's completely fake. And I talked about AI in a recent episode, and I jokingly said that I welcome our AI overlords because I use AI in a number of different ways. And I think AI, like guns, is simply a tool. And the problem is, how do we use it? How do we use it properly? And how do we safeguard against its misuse? More and more, though, I'm seeing and hearing lots and lots of AI. I regularly see complaints in some of the Christian heavy metal groups and that I am a member of, complaining about AI music, or I see articles like the one about the country music artist who, there was another, recently there was I'm trying to remember, I think it was an actress. It doesn't even exist. There was, if you watch YouTube, just about every other or every third commercial with a voiceover is an AI voice, and more we're seeing things with AI creeping in, and it's getting better and better and harder to tell. One thing I noticed this week, for example, was someone had shared what I thought was a really cool story. It was about the discovery of a nearly complete statue of Aphrodite that had been found, a Roman statue that had been found in a town in Turkey. And this was from a group, a social media group that was a history social media group. I think it was called like History Time or something like this. And they accompanied their little blurb, which did not have a link to a news story. That should always be your first clue. If you see a story that's being shared around on social media and it has a suspect photograph, then if they don't link to an actual story, then one, question whether or not the story is real. So you got to do some research, and you should do that before you go and share that story again. And always be very cautious about sharing the photo. In this case, it was a really vivid, really detailed photo of a Roman statue half buried that had been apparently dug up. It looked very clean, and it looked very, I don't know, it looked too perfect. So I did, it looked like AI, to be honest. Right off the bat, I said, that's an AI photo. So I went and I looked, I did some research. Sure enough, they did find a statue of Aphrodite in this town in Turkey. There are photos of the actual statue, but for some reason, this supposedly history-based social media group decided to accompany their story with an AI photo of this, an AI-generated picture of the statue, which looks nothing like the actual statue. So it's becoming innocuous. It's becoming like constant. Everywhere you turn, you run into it. And as I've said before, and as I said earlier, to me, AI is a tool that can be used to improve your life, to make things easier for you and simpler, you can do some really amazing things, but it's a matter of how you use it and how you recognize its misuse. And what I thought I would do, I'd been thinking about this for a while because I had seen, it might have been Ben Shapiro or Matt Walsh, someone like this, who had gotten involved with a back and forth with an AI chatbot and decided to have conversations and ask questions of AI about certain topics, and just to see how they reacted and how they responded. And that has, when I saw that's been months ago, but that put an idea in the back of my head that it would be kind of interesting to see what kind of information comes out of AI platforms related to gun rights, and particularly when it comes to biblical values and Christianity, the Bible, and gun rights. And so I thought I would run some questions, run a question by four different AI platforms that I asked the exact same question. And I wanted to see what kind of an answer I got from these. And then I thought I would respond to these and kind of play at 20 questions here with AI. Although I'm not going to be doing this back and forth like I'm having a conversation with a chatbot. Although that might be interesting in the future, just to ping pong questions back and forth to see how they respond in real time. But what I asked the exact same question to all these platforms, and I used ChatGPT, Venice.ai, Google Co-Pilot, and Perplexity. And I asked the exact same question. The question was, can you give me 10 questions about Christianity and gun rights? And I wanted to see if these AI platforms ask the questions from any particular point of view, or if these questions are put forward in a way that actually encourages discussion and debate and honest, you know, seeking for the truth, as opposed to pushing a narrative. So the one question that I got back really in some form or other, Perplexity gave me some interesting, some very different answers or questions. A lot of them are very similar. I'm not sure that I can pull together. I mean, essentially, I've got 40 questions here, but I don't know that I can whittle this down to even 20 because a lot of them come back with not exactly worded the same, but basically the same question or the same wording of a question. And the one that is most common is, how do Christian teachings on peace and nonviolence relate to the right to bear arms? To me, that is a very it seems like a very non-biased question. I think it's a good one. I don't know that anybody will come, will go through and ask questions of AI like this. But I thought it would be interesting to see what you get. Some of these things do, like I think it's Perplexity. Perplexity actually goes and queries database or other websites for related discussions and tries to pull together information. And it actually gives you links. ChatGPT, Venice.ai, and Google Co-Pilot don't do that. But what I like about Perplexity is it will actually give you sort of like a bibliography at the end for anything that you ask it to research. But, which is nice because in the case of Perplexity, unlike the other ones, you're going to get answers to your queries that are grounded in answers that are already searchable and out there, right? It will go and collect information and sort of collate it and put it all together and spit out information to you that you can then follow up on based on links that it will provide. ChatGPT generally doesn't do that. Venice.ai doesn't do that. So what I thought I would do is go through these questions and just sort of respond to them because I think they're important. I think they're good questions for us to consider, and questions that should be easily answerable by any of us in the Christian gun rights community if you run across it. So this first one, and there are variations of this on pretty much on all 4 of the platforms that I queried. How do Christian teachings on peace and nonviolence relate to the right to bear arms? And my answer to that would be, there's a couple of things. The teachings in the Bible about peace and nonviolence relate to essentially to criminal acts, unlawful killing, murder, assault, that sort of thing, but also not seeking vengeance when you're wronged. They also relate to not being quarrelsome and creating strife or division, causing fights and that sort of thing. So, but how does it relate to gun rights? Well, the teachings on peace and nonviolence in the Bible, ultimately they teach us that the right to bear arms is a responsibility, and therefore it's not something that should be abused. Because the teachings on nonviolence, and as we'll get to some of these other questions, you'll see the teachings on nonviolence and peace do not exclude the ownership of weapons. They simply discuss and sort of point you in the direction of not misuse, just like I was talking about with AI. It's not a matter of, I don't think it's a matter of like banning AI. I think that genie's out of the bottle, just like guns are sort of a genie out of the bottle at this point. But the ethical question surrounding guns is very similar to the ethical question surrounding AI, and that is how to use it. Can self-defense with a firearm be reconciled with Jesus's command to turn the other cheek? The answer to that is yes, absolutely. And to find out a more detailed answer, you should read the book, Duty to Defend, which I edited in 2022. And we have a chapter specifically on this verse, the turn the other cheek verse, which is really not about allowing yourself to be raped or robbed or beaten. It has it's very different. So let's see if I can find that particular chapter and see if I can paraphrase a couple of things here. It'd be great if I could find, if I knew my own book well enough to go straight to the page without having to go. There it is, 64. Page 64. This book is so worn out because I've been using it for episodes and writing in it. Oh, yes. We haven't discussed this on the show yet. This comes from Evan Gegline. He of Table Talk Radio fame. And he wrote a book. He wrote a chapter on Matthew 5:38-39. You've heard it said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. Well, slapping someone on the cheek is an act of insolence. It's an insult. And we're told in this, excuse me for bumping the microphone, we're told in this passage and the subsequent passages that we should turn the other cheek when someone insults us. When we are done wrong, we should turn the other cheek, and essentially we should not seek revenge. That's what that's about. So self-defense with a firearm, or any other weapon for that matter, really isn't applicable to the turn the other cheek thing. Turn the other cheek has nothing to do with self-defense, because self-defense is when you are in fear of grave bodily injury or death. Being slapped on the face by someone who wants to insult you is not a life-threatening attack. It's not an attack that is likely to lead to your death. If someone slaps you and then continues to menace you and try to beat you up, that's different. If someone is slapping you on the face, as they did, the slapping on the face thing in biblical times was, and today as well, is an insult. You've probably seen in the movies, the two guys who are having a dispute, and one of them pulls his white glove off and puts it in the other hand and then slaps the other one across the face. That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about an insult and not actually self-defense. So when you see the turn the other cheek verse or quoted in support of gun control, this person is taking this verse out of context and not applying it properly. I'm not going to read to you this entire article, and I have not done that. I have not done an episode on this article because it's one of the longest. It's one of the longest and most detailed in the book, and I would encourage you to grab a copy. armedlutheran.us/duty. Go to Amazon and grab yourself a copy. And turn to page 64 and see what Reverend Gegline says. Let's see here. This is an interesting question that ChatGPT came up with. Should churches permit or prohibit firearms on their premises? Again, this is sort of an open-ended question and is not presented in a biased way. I think this is a good, it's props to ChatGPT here for presenting a question that is non-partisan and is just open for debate. My answer to that question, by the way, would be permit. And personally, that would be my preference. I think it's for each congregation to decide, but I think it's a decision that should be made intelligently and not simply, oh, guns are bad, therefore we shouldn't have them, we shouldn't carry them in church. But if you know anything about the relatively recent history of violence in the United States, you know that churches are often targets of malefactors who would like to cause grave bodily injury or death to members of that congregation. So I would say absolutely churches should permit their members they should allow their members to bring guns to church. I think that should be absolutely okay. Let's see. Let me skip down to another one of these platforms and see how they ask some of these questions. This is an interesting one. From Venice.ai, what role did Christianity play in the historical context of the Second Amendment's adoption? That's an interesting question. And if I had actually prepped for this, I might have gone and gotten the Federalist Papers out and scanned it before I started this. But as I understand it, the founders recognized, and you can clearly see in the document, in the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence, the founders and our Constitution, the founders recognized that mankind is endowed by God, our Creator, as it says, with certain inalienable rights, and those should be protected with force if necessary. Those who would seek to take your life, those who would seek to take your liberty, should be opposed, must be opposed, and sometimes that requires the use of force. And the government could be one of those who would seek to oppress us and to take our liberty or our life. And in that case, the use of firearms is an important thing. The Second Amendment was put in place for that purpose. It is the amendment that protects all the others. It is the right that protects all of our other rights. Let's see. What biblical examples, this again from Venice.ai, what biblical examples are used to argue for or against gun ownership in the context of self-defense? In the context of self-defense, there are lots that are used, and as I pointed out earlier, again, shameless plug, in my book, Duty to Defend, there are lots of examples where the Bible is used to support or oppose gun rights, mostly to oppose. But in most of those cases, those verses are being misused, like the turn the other cheek. There are plenty of examples on both sides. One of the best examples of the Bible being misused on the pro-gun side is Psalm 144:1, which is let's see, which chapter is that? That was our good friend, Reverend Guillaume Williams. Where is it? Oh, there it is. Training My Hands for War, page 31. This is this is a verse or the sort of repeated in Psalm 144:1, Psalm 18:34, and 2 Samuel 22, where, and you will, if you've been around the gun world for any length of time, you've probably seen this particular verse. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. And I think that was, I can't remember if that was used by the sniper guy in the movie Saving Private Ryan, but it is a bad example of a verse that is used for the God-given, just to support the Second Amendment, because it's in relation to soldiers and warfare, which I am not. So it doesn't really apply to me. But there are lots and lots of examples of verses being taken out of context and used for or against gun ownership. In addition to this one, there's, the beating swords into plowshares, beating spears into pruning hooks, and peacemakers, and being at peace with everyone, and those sorts of things. There are lots and lots of examples. They're almost always incorrect. And so if you had the copy of the book, you would know this. Maybe I should submit it to Venice.ai so they know. Let's see. What is the impact, this is from Venice.ai as well, what is the impact of Christian political engagement on gun rights legislation in the United States? Ooh. I would say it has largely been negative. Hear me out. Because a lot of the anti-gun, a lot of the voices that clamor the loudest against gun rights are progressive Christians, progressive churches, the Methodist Church, the Episcopalian Church, certain parts of the Catholic Church, certain parts of the, one in particular Lutheran denomination. They tend to be more engaged on this topic. The pro-gun, or the sort of as a member of a conservative Lutheran church body, we tend to look at gun rights as adiaphora, as sort of one of these. It's left to the freedom of the Christian, and we don't have a doctrinal stance on it. The Catholic Church does include in their catechism a obvious support for the use of weapons for self-defense, lethal self-defense if necessary to protect life. But for the most part, most of the Roman Catholic Church, particularly in America, is left-leaning, and so most of the political engagement by Christians in this country on gun rights has been negative towards gun rights. That would be my answer to that question. What biblical principles, this from Google Co-Pilot, what biblical principles, if any, support or challenge the right to bear arms? Well, there's more, I would say, that support the right to bear arms than challenge it. All of the examples that I've ever seen where the Bible has been used or biblical principles have been espoused in opposition to gun rights are misguided, taken out of context, misapplied. There are examples, sometimes exaggerated, in the Bible that suggest that, at the very least, gun rights or the ownership of weapons is permissible and is not something that should be opposed or that is opposed by God. The best example of that is, it's surprisingly, it's not Exodus 22:2, because that talks about self-defense, and it is not specific to the use of a weapon. I mean, you can infer from it, but it's really more about generally about self-defense. But the verse about selling your cloak and buying a sword is probably the best example. There are a couple of others. There's the passage from Nehemiah where they're talking about rebuilding the walls of the city after they had been destroyed, and of course, and they're carrying weapons while they work to be prepared in case something happens. There is, I think it's Luke 22:36 through 38, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, page 99. So we're talking about where Jesus tells his disciples, "Hey, if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and go buy one." His disciples come to say, "Look here, Lord, here are two swords," and he's like, "Okay, that's enough." I have an explanation of this in the book, but that is used as on the pro-gun side. Sometimes I've seen that used as an exhortation for citizens if you're a Christian, you have to go get a gun. You have to own a gun to be a good Christian, which is silly. But that would be, I think, the strongest. That and Nehemiah, and there's a couple of others, but that is probably the clearest where Christ says, "Yeah, sell your cloak, go buy a sword," and he's not freaked out when his disciples say, "Well, we've already got a sword, we've got two," and he's like, "Cool." Jesus doesn't rebuke them and tell them to throw the swords away. So that's probably the best you're going to get as far as support for gun rights, or the most clear, I would say, that you don't have to read a whole lot into. Should Christians rely on firearms or place their this is from Perplexity. Should Christians rely on firearms or place their trust in God for protection against them? Why not both? Would be my answer to that question. And I think I talked about this in the last episode. While on the one hand, I own a gun for self-defense, for home defense, for defending my family against those who would try to harm them, but I don't place all of my trust in the gun as my savior. I know, for example, that if I use that firearm in a self-defense situation, I might very well lose. But my trust in God for protection is not necessarily to protect. Like, I pray, Lord, if I ever have to use this, I pray that I would use it properly, that I would not make a mistake, that I would use it in a way that doesn't put other people in harm's way, and that that my life, my family's lives, or whoever it is whose aid I'm coming to, that they would be saved. But I also recognize, Lord, if it doesn't work out, I know you've prepared a place for me. So I talked about this, like I said, I talked about this a bit in the last episode. Our trust in God is not necessarily, as I said, I think I even put it this way: I don't trust that God is going to send a legion of angels to defend me against the home invader. If he does, great, but that's not what I'm expecting or trusting, because he doesn't promise that. He promises that we will have a challenging life in this world because it's fallen and sinful. What I trust in God for is what's to come in the next life, whenever my time is up. How do Christians reconcile the right to self-defense with the commandment, "Thou shalt not kill," from Exodus 20:13? Now, this has a link to Pursue God, which sounds like one of old... I can't remember that guy's name. Well, the "thou shalt not kill" thing is a misreading of the original text, as I understand it. The original text is "thou shalt not murder" and not "thou shalt not kill." So "thou shalt not kill" is not a good translation. "Thou shalt not murder," the fifth commandment, is about not illegally, immorally taking another person's life. And self-defense is not immorally or illegally taking someone else's life. This is a good one. If stricter gun laws are enacted for public safety, are Christians obligated to obey them, even if it conflicts with their convictions about self-defense? And the answer to that is yes. We are called in Romans 13 to submit ourselves to the governing authorities. Doesn't mean we have to like it. And we are in a country, thank goodness, where we are able to act both as a Christian in submitting to authorities and also as a citizen in working to change the laws, to lobby our congressmen and our senators and write letters to editors and work with advocacy groups to try to change restrictive gun laws. So yes, and we've talked about this many times on the show as well. If stricter gun laws are enacted, you are bound as a Christian to obey. Doesn't mean you have to like it, and it doesn't mean that you have to live with it. Your choices then are pick up and move to somewhere else. Or, for example, if a place is designated as a gun-free zone, simply don't go there. That's why I tend to avoid businesses where guns aren't allowed, and you should too. You have ways, and we talked about this in the book, in the chapter on gun-free zones, and in episode, let's see, in which episode was it? Way back when, the very first year of the show, 9 years ago, episode 43, some 600 episodes, 620 episodes ago, we talked about, or 420 episodes ago, we talked about this with Reverend Ralph Abernathy, where we talked about how we as Christians are supposed to look at gun-free zones, which is a form of restrictive gun law. That we are to, as a Christian, we are sinning if we ignore the law. If you carry, and I've seen many people who will argue on the gun rights side, hey, I would rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6. Well, there's somebody else above that that's got to judge as well. And ultimately, and the Bible makes clear that you're supposed to be subject to the governing authorities because they are the authorities that God has instituted, then you darn well better do it. So if someone puts up a gun-free zone sign or a no-gun sign at their store, in North Carolina when I was living there. I'm not sure whether this has changed, but any no gun sign was had the force of law. Here in Texas, that's not the case. You have to have specific wording, and the size of the sign has to be specific, and it has to be specific. There's a whole rule about how the signage is supposed to be presented. You can't simply put the words "no guns" and it carry the weight of law. In that case, you can ignore it unless it's a actual legal situation like a school, which unfortunately are all listed as, under the what was it, the Gun Free Schools Act or Gun Free Schools Safe Schools Act. I can't remember. It's a Joe Biden era law that needs to be repealed, but you still have to abide by it. But as a citizen, in your vocation as citizen, you could and you should advocate for those laws to be changed. How should Christians respond to gun violence in society from a theological perspective? That's an interesting question. Prayer comes to mind first, and is usually the first thing that everyone on the left poo-poos when we talk about praying for the victims. Your first response should be to pray for all of those who are affected. You should be praying for the first responders who have to deal with these situations. And then you should be praying for our politicians, the people who make the laws, and the district attorneys and all the people who have to enforce the laws, that they can find a way to curtail gun violence in society, violence in general. Not a fan of the gun violence term, but still, it's now firmly embedded in the lexicon. Praying, because we all know that there's a simple solution to violence. So we should be praying that our politicians who cannot seem to find simple solutions to save their lives, and to be honest, don't want simple solutions. They would rather have the problem. And I'm straying a bit into violating the eighth commandment here, but it seems to me that based on their votes and their actions and their words, that they would rather have the gun violence so that they can continue to do nothing to actually address the violence in society. If that makes any sense. Because the vast majority of violence in this country is committed by a certain segment of the population, and the people on one side of the aisle in our government cannot bring themselves to do anything that would negatively impact those people, because putting them in jail means they can't vote. It also means, stricter laws, as we had at one time, tends to disproportionately impact certain communities, and those communities tend to vote for one specific party. And if you crack down on crime, then you tend to both put your voters in jail and also anger people who typically give you money. So it's better to have gun violence and blame law-abiding citizens and guns than it is to actually do something about the criminals who commit the violence. So that's what we should be doing as Christians. We should be advocating for a change in our laws and how we deal with crime. We should be praying that our politicians put aside all the pettiness and actually work for the good of society. And we should, above all else, pray for the victims and for first responders who deal with these things on a regular basis, unfortunately. Can gun ownership be considered a form of stewardship or responsibility in Christian ethics? Interesting question. I think so. Because, like I said earlier, one of the things that the Bible's teachings about peace and nonviolence teach us that the right to keep and bear arms is a responsibility that we should not abuse. And so, where was that question? So, Christians, so gun ownership, done correctly, I guess, is the way I would describe it. Owning, obeying the law, advocating for sound policy, storing firearms responsibly, getting training and learning how to use a firearm responsibly, carrying responsibly. That's a form of stewardship. It is and if you're advocating as a Christian gun owner, you should be advocating for training. You should be advocating for smart storage. I'm not suggesting going to the extent that the left is suggesting, where they say you should always store your guns and your ammunition separately. Well, that just doesn't make sense. I don't agree with that. But you shouldn't be just leaving guns laying around your house. So that's a form of stewardship. That's a form of responsibility. You should be modeling these things as a Christian gun owner. You can't be. You don't want to be one of these bad example people who shows up on, as the Florida man story, who did something stupid with a gun, when you're one of the voices that's out there calling for changes to gun control laws. When you're advocating for greater gun rights and greater freedoms, you can't be out there misusing that responsibility, because that hurts the rest of us. So you have a responsibility as a gun owner, Christian or not, to behave ethically and responsibly. Let's see if I can find a couple more, and then we'll wrap this up. A couple more interesting questions. There's the turn the other cheek thing again. How do different Christian denominations interpret the morality of owning guns? We talked about this a little bit earlier, and I think I have a page on the website, I think it's still up, that lists all the different, we used to have this, let me look. Features, churches and guns. Yes, I still have it. So you can go to the website. You can go to armedlutheran.us. At the top of the page, there is a menu item called Features. Hover over that, go to the bottom. You will see churches and guns. And this lists all of the different. Now, I haven't updated this in a while, but it's still pretty solid. It's a good foundation. It lists various Christian denominations and rates them based on their stance on gun rights. In addition to listing the names of the different denominations, I also have a link to their website with results for their links to their policies on guns and gun violence. So that's generally how I've got it laid out. And if you'd like to see the whole list, again, visit armedlutheran.us/churches and guns. And actually, you'd be better off just go to features in the main menu and scroll down to churches and guns, and you'll get a big list there. So anyway, That would be the answer to that question. Let's see if we can do one more. There we go. I'll finish up with this one. This one came from Google Co-Pilot. Is there a biblical basis for supporting or opposing government regulation of firearms? This is going to be a little nuanced. Because I do believe that there should be some regulation. Like I've always said, I've been very consistent on this. I am not an absolutist when it comes to the Second Amendment, because I don't believe that crazy people should own guns. I don't believe that kids under 18 should own guns. I don't believe that convicted felons who have not, I believe when it comes to convicted felons, that's a little bit of a different thing. I do believe that there should be a method for convicted felons to restore their gun rights. I do not support violent convicted felons ever getting their gun rights back. Sorry, I just don't. So I do believe there is a biblical basis for supporting gun regulation, both in terms of simply supporting the government, obeying the government, as Romans 13 says, submitting to government authority, but keeping the gun, having some regulation that keeps guns out of the hands of the wrong people, which is something that we claim on the pro-gun side that we want whenever there are arguments about guns and gun violence. That's something that we should desire and not just use as a talking point to defend our gun rights. We should desire some sort of regulation that keeps guns out of the wrong hands. And the reason for that, the biblical basis for that, is the meaning of the commandments, the explanation of the commandments. Love your neighbor as yourself. Or one of the explanations is, first and foremost, there's two ways to summarize. You summarize the commandments as love God above all things and love your neighbor as yourself. And to me, government regulation of firearms that keeps guns out of the wrong hands, there is a biblical basis for supporting that, on the basis that you are loving your neighbor, because you don't want the crazy person to get a hold of a firearm. Now, love of neighbor is also the reason that you oppose certain regulations, because by taking guns out of the hands of the law-abiding, you are leaving them at the mercy of criminals. Because while we are told to submit to the authorities can't be there all the time to protect us. There's a recognition even in, as I mentioned, Exodus 22:2, where it talks about if someone breaks into your home in the night and they are struck and killed, there's no blood guilt for the person who killed them. My apologies, my phone. So there is a biblical basis for supporting, for opposing the regulations that would take those tools of self-defense away from the law-abiding. Absolutely. And it's all centered in love of neighbor. We're called to love our neighbor as ourselves. The fifth commandment calls on us to defend our neighbor, and if they are, to prevent them from being harmed. If we can prevent them from being harmed, we should. And our neighbor is not just the person that lives across the street from us. It's not just the people in our household. So there is a biblical basis for supporting and for opposing. I think there is a biblical basis for both. Some regulation is necessary to keep guns out of the hands of the wrong people. And the underlying reason for that support is love of neighbor. At the same time, that we should oppose the government taking or making it more difficult for the law-abiding to own guns for the exact same reason, love of neighbor. It comes down to that. Taking guns away, restricting guns, passing gun control laws, banning guns, that's not loving your neighbor. Especially when you're talking about our neighbors who live in the inner city, you are absolutely leaving them at the tender mercies of home invaders and gangbangers. And we shouldn't support that. The Bible doesn't support it. At the same time, we should support well thought out and reasoned regulation of firearms to prevent our neighbor from being harmed by people who shouldn't have firearms but do. So, and that doesn't get into the minutia of what regulations are appropriate and which aren't. I'm not even going to dig into that at this point because we're already an hour into the show. So I'm going to leave it at that. If you have any thoughts or any questions about any of this, it's an interesting thing. And I would recommend, actually, this has kind of been fun. Pull up one of these AI platforms, ask a question like this, and challenge yourself to answer these questions. And it will, at the very least, it will kind of help you use it as a tool to defend your rights in a discussion with a real human being. To maybe in some cases here to honestly try to look more deeply at your core convictions, and then go out and grab a copy of Duty to Defend as well. Last plug of the show, armedlutheran.us/duty. And for those who don't understand what I'm talking about, this is a book with over 30 articles written by over 20 ordained Lutheran pastors from across the country, taking passages from the Bible that, as I talked about earlier, are misused commonly in the gun rights debate. And they put those verses into context and help you understand better what those verses really mean. So I would encourage you to give this a try. This to me is a good use of AI as a tool to help kind of sharpen your skills of, thinking critically about these questions and about how you would answer them. And so, give it a shot. Again, it's a tool. It's all about how you use it. Again, if you have any questions or any comments, visit our feedback page, armedlutheran.us/feedback, and leave us a message. Leave us a message on Facebook or on YouTube. We'd love to hear from you. I will be getting to your comments in a future episode, and we do have the November online hangout coming in the next couple of weeks, so stay tuned for that. Until then, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. Check out the Facebook page, The Armed Lutheran, or join our Facebook group, Fans of Armed Lutheran Radio. If you like what you hear, please leave us a comment on our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback, or a review on iTunes, and let us know what you think. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio.